Spirituality Matters. And let's settle in to find that sacred space between here where I am and there where you are. And let us be reminded that the holy transcends our physical bodies, and our time together is just as sacred and meaningful as if we were sitting beside one another. Okay, let's get started. So if you've been a listener of Spirituality Matters since we began this podcast back in the fall of last year, you know I typically speak on a topic and maybe answer a few questions. But today is an exciting new chapter of Spirituality Matters because we are inviting other voices into this sacred space. And it is only appropriate that our first guest be someone who has been on this spiritual journey with me since 2015 when we first met in seminary. So now a few weeks ago, we announced Numa Soul Center for Spiritual Transformation. And so for today, I am honored to introduce my guest is Reverend Arda Itez. Now, Reverend Arda is the Director of Programs and Partnerships for Numa Soul. And she is also a humanist minister. And I'm going to give Reverend Arda a chance in a few minutes to tell us what that is. She's a human rights activist, and she has been in the role of spiritual leadership in several ways in New York City, and I'm going to let her explain that as well. And like I said, she's one of my seminary sisters, and we became very close very quickly when we first started seminary together. So with that being said, Reverend Arda, thank you so much for being here today and being a part of this journey with us. And I give you a chance now to say hello.
Well, hello, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. It's really cool to see all this kind of unfolding, what instinctively we knew, right, in 2015, now 6 years later.
Exactly.
Oh coming to fruition.
And it's been 6 years.
I know, I can't believe it's been 6 years. It's gone by so quickly.
So we have so much to talk about today, but I do want to share the first day of seminary. So that was in September of 2015. And I know why they had that sign on the elevator that took you up to the floor of One Spirit, where it basically was saying, don't turn and run, because I know I was thinking about doing that. But here I am in New York City, someplace that I've never spent time with by myself, trying to navigate the city. I did find the building like 90 minutes before class because I wanted to make sure I was there on time. And I huddled over into the corner of the room because that was my safe place. And I was still certainly working through some of my own religious trauma and my own issues. And here you come in, just this larger than life magnetic personality. And that was very intimidating, but I was drawn to you. I knew that our spirits, our souls recognized each other for what, we don't even have to go into how that's defined or described or anything, but I just remember being very much drawn to you, even though for the weekend we set apart. I just knew that somehow we would end up end up working together. Could you describe a little bit about that weekend for you and what that was like?
You know, I ended up enrolling in seminary on a whim. And that in itself is a story, you know, that in itself is another story of how I ended up there. But I had resigned from a very successful career on a whim and enrolled in seminary, I don't think fully understanding that I was enrolling in seminary, you know. And when I got in the elevator and I saw that sign, I almost didn't go up the elevator, you know, but I did. And I walked in and I remember being so uncomfortable because there was nobody in the room that looked like me, sounded like me. Like we were just so different. All of us were so different. And I remember I saw you and I remember zeroing in on you. Just immediately something drew me to you. And I said, I mean, you and I are like night and day, frankly, you know, on the surface. If somebody were to see us together, we're like night and day in every respect. But immediately I was drawn to you, and I could see that there was I could see that you were timid, but I knew behind it, there was something there. And I said, oh, I got to get this out of this woman. And I will at some point. You know, there's something there. And like you said, I just recognized you immediately. And you may recall, I stood up at one point and said to the class that I was leaving.
I do.
You know, because we were taking turns, you know what it is? I was listening to everybody's stories, and everybody had what I now know as religious trauma. I didn't even know the term back then, you know, just as we're talking to people who are hearing that term for the first time. And I was seeing so much emotion, and I got so uncomfortable. And I said, what am I doing here? So when it was my turn to speak, I stood up and said, I think I've made a mistake. This is clearly not for me. I wish all of you luck, but I will not be coming back. And as I was leaving, I think on the lunch break, I was like, I'm not coming back. Joyce, Reverend Joyce, who's no longer with us, who ended up becoming a dear friend and a mentor, tiny little woman. And I know you know who Reverend Joyce is. I'm just explaining for the listeners. Tiny little woman, a wisp of a woman with big blue eyes. That, you know, elderly woman. She took me by the elbow, and she had a heavy New York accent. And she said, I know you think that you don't belong here. She said, but you do. You will say the things that people are afraid to say, and you will be a voice for the voiceless. So I hope you will consider coming back. I got in the elevator, I went down, I was halfway down 8th Avenue, and I was like, who was that woman? You know, and hearing her voice, I just kept hearing her voice over and over again. I ended up turning around and coming back. And it was the best thing I ever did.
Oh, I will say amen to that. Because so many times throughout those 2 years that we spent together, you did become that voice of courage for those of us, because we did have a lot of classmates who were deconstructing from the Christian faith, as I was, and that I do want you to have an opportunity to share a little bit about how different your experience is, if that's something that you're comfortable to do with in this space. But I do want to back up a minute and say what it is that you are excited about as far as your space in Numa Soul, because this is something that you and I actually started working together a couple of years ago when you began to do some developmental editing for me on some projects that will be coming up very soon. And then that has just naturally just rolled into what's now developing with Numa Soul. So would you like to share a little bit about what you see Numa Soul doing and what your part is in it?
What excites me so much about Numa Soul is that you already have this audience. You have this, you know, captive audience of over 300,000 people on social media that are also traumatized. And you don't realize how people are suffering, right? You really don't. And they don't know any other way. They've been traumatized by religion. They've been traumatized by, you know, generational trauma, just a number of things. And they don't know any other way. And what I find so incredible is that we now have this opportunity, you know, to show them what can be. Whether you're deeply religious or not, either way, you know, we have the opportunity to show them what can be, what they can be, and what they can bring into the world themselves. And that takes work. So part of what I find really special about my role is bringing in the right people for that audience. You know, because I'm very fortunate that through the work that I've done here in New York City, I've been a spiritual leader at I guess you could call it a non-denominational church. I know what should and shouldn't be done in this type of organization, right? Just from the experience that I've had. And what we are going to be doing here is so unique and so special, and is going to be beneficial for so many people. And to bring in those right voices, the people that I've had the great pleasure of working with over the years, some of the most, and I hate to use the word progressive spiritual leaders, but spiritual leaders that are redefining spirituality and religion altogether. You know, I've worked with people that if, you know, you talk about, you only know, let's say, Judaism a certain way. I have a friend and a colleague who's a rabbi that has completely redefined what Judaism is. And you've got people that go to their Shabbat services on Friday night that are Catholic, that are Muslim, because it's they call it an all-inclusive, everybody-friendly, artist-driven, God-optional, experimental Jewish community. So it opens a door for everybody. So there is a way there's a way of honoring your tradition if you choose to. There's a way to explore. There's a way to give it all up and just take little pieces of whatever works for you. You know, there's so many ways to do it and to lead a fulfilling life. And I'm bringing those people in to create that opportunity for people to learn and explore and do what we did. You know, when we were in seminary, we got to learn, we got to explore, we got to see. And that's so important. And nobody knows that there's another way. There's multiple other ways, you know.
That's so beautiful. And it makes me so excited. In a few minutes, I'd like you to share more about some of those workshops that we're planning and perhaps discuss those a little bit. But you touched on the whole concept of spirituality and how in the past, the way I see that, especially from my experience, is that the word has been hijacked, if you will, by religion when it really is for humanity. And I know you and I have had a lot of conversations about what that's going to look like, but I think hearing that from your perspective, especially as someone who is a humanist minister, and I think that's something that people probably don't understand what exactly that is. Now, you and I were ordained interfaith, interspiritual ministers, which is already two words that people don't, we're constantly explaining. But could you go down that path a little bit more and explain what spirituality looks outside of the construct of religion, but also in how that applies to you as a humanist minister?
Spirituality outside of religion, I think, for me, is the most important thing a person can do for themselves. Religion at its best, at its absolute best, can lead you to a path of radical awareness, a radical self-understanding. You know, it should be radical self-awareness. That's what religion should do for you. But unfortunately, many times it does not. However, when you move into a space of spirituality outside of religion, it becomes self-exploration. Because why do we turn to, very often, what do we look to religion for? We look for purpose, right? We look for meaning. We look for understanding. You know, why are we here? What purpose do we serve? That kind of thing. And you don't always get those answers. And those really aren't answers that somebody else can give you. You know, that's a place that you have to get to by yourself. And when you step out of the confines of organized religion and begin that exploration, that's where the journey truly begins. Now, I'm not knocking religion. If people, if people can have that experience within religion, wonderful. But you just don't see that too often. You know, spirituality for me in my life, especially as a humanist, and I came to be a humanist because I went down this long, winding road of religion and exploring. I started my spiritual journey literally began at the age of 7. I was, from a very young age, a seeker, wanting to know, well, what is God? Who is God? Why is God? Well, what are we doing here? What purpose do we serve? Really young. So by the time I was 10, I had read the Torah, I had read the Bible, and I had read the Quran cover to cover. That's not to say I understood what I was reading, but the desire was there. So I traveled this path from trying to study the Abrahamic faiths, and then I went into Hinduism, and then I, studied Buddhism, and then I studied Wicca, but this entire time, and I was born Muslim, my background is Muslim, um, and I went through this whole search, but never with formal guidance, right? Not with. So by the time I got to seminary, I still thought that like Wicca was something to be shunned, despite the fact that I practiced Wicca, for an extended period of time in my life. Going through that, and really in seminary, spending the time with each, I even got to know Islam in a much different way, because I was born into a Muslim family that was, for all intents and purposes, secular. The only thing we didn't do was eat pork. We went to the mosque if somebody died, but we didn't celebrate any of the holidays and, anything. And my parents never taught me anything about it. God was just used as a threat. God was always a threat. So that was always an issue for me. Like, what is this? I don't understand this. I have to live with this thing looking over me, waiting to punish me. It was always, God was always just ready to strike you if you did something wrong. That was the mentality. So I grew very, very bitter and disdainful, which is why I started, I think, exploring outside of the Abrahamic faiths, right? And I was looking at alternative things like Wicca and Hinduism. And when I got into seminary is when I started understanding, whoa, wait a minute, there's a whole different way of understanding this. And most people only know what they know, right? People know religion through a Western lens. This is a Judeo-Christian country, right? And most people only understand the fundamentals. Most people don't explore beyond that. Once you do, once you delve into the deeper meaning of these things, and you find these incredible teachers, like Matthew Fox and Thomas Merton and, John Shelby Spong, and just these extraordinary teachers and authors, and it becomes a whole different thing, and you develop a really different understanding from the mystical aspect, right? And the definition of God changes. Because I grew up understanding God as a anthropomorphic male being, kind of like what you see in paintings, right? When I think of God, I think of Charlton Heston as Moses.
Absolutely.
That's the visual that we all have. And that's not God. I don't even use the word God because it doesn't hold meaning for me. What it does is it brings back that visual of that male figure, who represents punishment, and so I don't even use the word God, and I don't see God in that way. What I see is I am a humanist because everything first and foremost is up to us. Before any other, supernatural ideology, to make the world a better place, to make life better for myself, for each other, it is up to us. Everything is done with human hands. Now, spiritual support, I think, is wonderful. But I don't look to religion or spirituality to solve the world's problems, including my own. That starts with us.
That's beautifully said. And I think this goes back to something that you and I were discussing the other day, where we came up with the phrase practical spirituality, because often, especially at the beginning, when the social media platforms began to grow, you would see people saying, "I'm having trouble meditating," or I feel weird praying to a God that I no longer believe in. Well, just what you said, the work that we do on our inner self it should be reflected in how we show up in the world. And so our human essence is really our spiritual essence. It's how it's us building a bigger table of humanity. And sometimes religion loses its way when it starts to shrink what we are capable of doing when it comes to healing this world. And so I find myself quite often, I wouldn't say I get anxious, but I get somewhat frustrated when people want to focus on the how of spirituality versus what it is. What work are you doing in here to heal yourself, so that you're always trying to be a better version of yourself. I don't really care how many hours a day you meditate, or how many spiritual books you're reading, or how many malas you have around your neck. I want to see through the eyes of those around you how you've impacted them through your kindness and your compassion and your love. And I think that's what sometimes where religion loses its way, when it becomes hyper focused on perpetuating the institution versus helping people expand into that self-awareness, as you said, which is what I too believe spirituality is about. So that was beautifully said. I want to ask you something else that I think can help you expand a little bit on some of the topics that you just brought up. But one of my dearest friends at the very beginning of seminary, and even before that, when I was in college studying biblical studies, and then I went on to study world religions before I ended up in seminary. And I didn't know what I was going to do. I just knew that I was being called into something. And that was one of those places in our lives where you really just have to jump in and trust that you're going to dive into this deep end and see what happens. And that's certainly what happened with me. But she said to me to just keep moving towards that which breaks your heart. And I can see back in my life where I've done that in animal welfare and working for the rights of children and things like that. I didn't see that inside this ministry because I was actually naive in some ways, because I became sheltered when I left church, that I didn't realize how much religion was hurting the marginalized humans. I was protected from that, and part of that was because as a woman, I've experienced some of that. I certainly have experienced it as a Southern Baptist, when I was told I couldn't be a minister because I was a woman. But seeing, when you understand, like you were saying, that religious trauma, people didn't even realize that they're experiencing it, but also that they didn't know that the spiritual but not religious path was an option, that when they decided that leaving religion meant that it was hopeless, that there was nothing for them, that they actually started to migrate towards our message because we're giving them hope. But for you, so I've shared those experiences with our listeners before, but for you, what breaks your heart? And how do you see that being where you are today? How are those worlds coming together, if that's something you feel that you want to share with us today?
There are a lot of things that break my heart, but nothing breaks my heart more than injustice. Nothing breaks my heart more than racism. Nothing breaks my heart more than the social hierarchy that represses and oppresses people, whether it's, no matter what the excuse is, there's always an excuse for why people are oppressed, right? No matter what the excuse is, that's what drives me insane. And there are four things that contribute to oppression in our modern society. And that's colonialism, capitalism, supremacy, usually white supremacy, and toxic patriarchy. And what those four things have caused in the world, the suffering that those four things have caused, I lose sleep over that. And it intersects. All of those things intersect. Privilege intersects, and oppression intersects. And they're so deeply connected, and most people don't realize that. We've come a long way, but we're nowhere near where we need to be. And I believe that at this moment in time, we are at a tipping point. Every now and then you get to a point in history where there's a tipping point. And I think we are at that tipping point right now. So I have hope. I don't think we're going to see anything miraculous in our lifetime, but I think even in the past year, we've seen a change in attitude, but that has to be put into action, which it has not yet been put into action in a formal political sense, which is, that's what it takes for things to change. But there's been a big shift in attitude, and that's what it takes. You have to open people's hearts.
Yeah, beautifully said.
You have to open people's hearts have to open in order to recognize our humanity, no matter what our skin color, no matter what our gender. We're very binary in our thinking. And again, we're accustomed to what has always been. People don't like change, but it can happen gradually. And I believe we're at the point. And I believe that what we are doing is an important part of that. I believe it will help expedite this process. That's our contribution.
Yeah. Beautifully said. I want to touch on what you said about not seeing this in our lifetime. And that could possibly lead someone to think, well, then why even do the work? But when you look back through humanity, I mean, it's very easy to look at this slice of time and say, we're going backwards. But you have to expand out over thousands of years to see that we absolutely are not going backwards. But you have to reach a place of tension in order for something new to be born. And in this country, the one compelling factor that I think is going to also explode us into this new level of awareness and shifting of power is the fact that the data now shows that we are no longer a religious nation. I cannot share that data enough, and we'll put that link again in the show notes, where it just came out as a Gallup poll that for the first time in American history, more people say they are non-religious than there are people who identify with religion. Now, of course, that means all religion, but for a country, as you said, that's based on Judeo-Christian values, this is a significant shift that a lot of people who are in power have known for years, because this shift has been happening for 80 years, that we have had a decline of people being affiliated with religion. So that's not a coincidence that we are at this point in time where the majority its voice is not being represented by our governmental control. Mm-hmm. So that more than likely will get worse before it gets better. But for those of us who are part of the majority, it's very incumbent upon us to continue to educate ourselves, become informed activists, and because that's very much linked to our spirituality. And I know that you and I are very in sync with that, even though and I think that's what makes us so good when we talk about that yin yang energy, or that night and dark. On the way to do this recording today, I was listening to a podcast where someone was talking about how important it is for us to recognize that darkness is not bad, that there is a need. Not everything can be gentle and soft. It has to be sometimes loud, and to get your point across. And so where maybe Midwest meets New York City is exactly what Numa Soul
Yeah.
needs for the next phase.
I always tell everybody when I speak about you, I say, well, she's much nicer than I am, which is true to some extent. You are definitely much nicer than I am. And yes, at this point in time, Malcolm X once said, freedom by any means necessary. And the truth is, sometimes it's by any means necessary. When there has to be a major shift, we're entering this new paradigm. And I don't want people to misunderstand. When I say toxic patriarchy, people get the wrong idea that we're poo-pooing men. Patriarchy hurts men as much as it hurts women.
Good point.
The highest rate of suicide in this country is among white 40-something heterosexual cisgender men. There is a reason for that.
I did not know that. That's amazing.
I was shocked. I was shocked when I read that. I was convinced that it was, transgender youth. It's white, basically, it's white men. There is a reason for that. And it is all a result of toxic patriarchy. So when I talk about this shift that's happening, our entire culture is steeped in toxic patriarchy, and religion, and particularly evangelical Christianity, undergirds all of it. So if that's going to crumble, that religious ideology is going to crumble as well.
Yes. Much needed. Much needed.
Yes.
Hear. So let's touch a little bit on what's coming up for Numa Soul, because I know you've been working on some workshops that we're going to be launching in the fall, but June is also going to be a busy month for us because, as most of you probably know, it's Pride Month. And we're doing some things here to make sure that we are known as the allies that we are, and not only allies. There's one, and you're always bringing up this point about the fact that it's there's you can call yourself an ally, but where are you doing the work? And I think that holding ourselves accountable for that is important, not only in our personal lives, but also Numa Soul. So, so Pride Month is June. I would like for you, if you would like to share a little bit about the work that you've done as an advocate for the LGBTQIA+ community. I think our listeners would love to hear that.
Sure. I've been an ally and an advocate, God, for as long as I think since I was a teenager. And where I grew up, being LGBTQ was really not a big deal, even when it wasn't as, I just started watching Pose on Netflix, and I forgot that even at that time, because that was, at that time I was in my early 20s. My late teens, early 20s. So I was in that whole scene, and all my friends were, gay men. And I forgot that even then, there was still a stigma around being gay. And that was when HIV first became a thing, and they didn't know what it was, and they called it the gay cancer. And, I forgot all about that. What a luxury for me to be able to forget about that, right? To not have to endure. And it was so painful to watch because, when I think about how the community suffered, but it was a reminder of, okay, look at how far we've come. Look at how far the community has come. And despite that, there are still pockets, right, of maybe not here in New York City so much, but around the country, around the world, but speaking just here nationally, kids, LGBTQ kids, transgender kids that are just suffering in immeasurable ways. And one of the things that we were working on was, this was a few years back, with Shirlane McRae. She started what was she founded the NYC Unity Project, which was about creating resources for LGBTQ kids, especially those who are homeless in New York City. So yes, New York has a lot of resources for kids, and it has a lot of resources for, you know, the LGBTQ community, like the California Center and that kind of thing, but not enough. So what these kids, the thing was, these LGBTQ kids could not go to traditional homeless shelters like, you know, Covenant House, because they were getting abused.
Mm.
And what happened? The people in some of these places were, you know, turning a blind eye to what was happening because they were LGBTQ. So there were no safe spaces for these kids, and they were aging out of these homes. And just, so she created this program where to expand the support for LGBTQ kids. And as far as faith leaders, we created a system of spiritual support, because what broke my heart, I mean, the most, you have these kids that have not only been ostracized by their families and religious communities, but tortured, abused for being who they are. And many of them ran away, and they were still looking for validation to believe that they were not an abomination, or that they were loved by God, or, you know, and that broke my heart.
Mm.
You know, so I said, okay, well, we're going to be that, you know, those clergy people. So we had a whole team of clergy people from different religions to support these kids that wanted to be supported. And that was a real eye opener. And I was asked to kick off the LGBTQ people of color mental health conference. And I thought I understood the plight of the transgender community until I went to this conference, and I kicked it off for them. And I stayed, of course, to listen and learn. They had community members speaking, they had doctors speaking. You know, it was a really informative day. This was, I think, maybe in spring, early summer, and they paused to list the names of the transgender people, mostly women, mostly Black women, that had been murdered since the beginning of the year. And it took about 20 minutes to name all of these victims. And you think you know, you think you know, you don't know. And that's when I really became immersed in protecting and bringing awareness to the transgender community and their plight and what they suffer. Mainstream media doesn't talk about the number of transgender women that are killed because they don't care. They are considered, you know, on the fringes of society, and they're dehumanized, and that has to change. Yes. We have to recognize, the world has to recognize that this is part of our community. This is part of our human family, you know.
Yeah, our value is not based on our sexuality. It's on our humanity. But that goes back to that toxic patriarchy and the trickle-down effect of how that, regardless of your gender or your background or your religious beliefs, it has negative impacts on you. And how fortunate Numa Soul is to have your insight and your personal experiences and your passion for this activism to take this into Pride Month and for what we're going to be doing there. We're going to have a collection of items, which I know you've already seen some of them, that we will be donating a portion of our sales from those items to the Trevor Project. And you'll be able to find information about that on our website at numasoul.com. And now we have a few more minutes, if you'd like to talk a little bit about some of the workshops that are coming up in June, and then maybe some teasers for what's coming in the fall and the new.
Yeah, I would love to. Well, I'm sure listeners know by now that we have God is Gay coming up, which is the first workshop that we're going to be doing during Pride. It's a masterclass where we're going to be talking about specifically the clobber verses that are used to intimidate and just condemn the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah.
And also talking about the past and the future for the LGBTQ plus community from a socio-political perspective and from a scientific perspective. Now, I've done a lot of research on this. I'm not a doctor, but I've done enough research to give some information, some really solid and important information, because I want people to understand that it is not unnatural to be gay. It is not unnatural to be non-binary. It is not unnatural to be transgendered. We have to expand our thinking because it's all found in nature, you know, and that's what this is about. It's really about, and this class is for everybody. It's not just for LGBTQ people, you know, it's for everybody. It's anybody who loves an LGBTQ plus person. It's anybody who wants to be an ally, anybody who wants to support the community, whether you're religious or non-religious. It is one of those things that I think everybody, it's almost like required learning for, you know, people.
Absolutely.
So I think it's a great way for us to start, because we are going to have an LGBTQ plus specific curriculum. I think this is a great way to start, and we'll be bringing in voices from the community to teach. You know, it's not going to be you and I teaching it per se, but it's going to be people from the community that are actually teaching. And then we have, after that, we have the Hidden Homosexual with Reverend Dr. Jose Roman, who was our dean in seminary. He's one of the highest ranking executives at a major university here. And he's brilliant. He got his doctorate from NYTS, New York Theological Seminary. And this class is, I mean, I saw the outline for it and we discussed it. Again, this is one of those classes, despite the name, when you hear the Hidden Homosexual, you think, okay, it's just for the gay community. It's not. This is another one of those workshops that I think is required for people, because it's really about shadow work. You know, it's about delving into, and if people don't know what shadow work is, your shadow it's repressed. A simple definition is when you repress something, it manifests in your life in negative ways. So doing shadow work is facing that behavior that you're trying, or that belief, or whatever it is that you're trying to repress, so it doesn't manifest in unhealthy ways.
That absolutely goes back to that light and dark, and why it's so important to understand that we're bringing that along with us, and how we have to acknowledge that just as much as we do the other elements of us that we want to show the world. And so, yeah, that's a really important part. And I want to also emphasize what you just said about how these workshops, how they're being designed for people that, regardless of where you're coming from, they're not, yes, they are about focusing on the LGBTQIA plus community, but a lot of that is because we have a lot of indoctrination into our beliefs around that being gay is a sin. And you mentioned earlier that even as late as, I believe you said, coming into seminary, where you thought Wicca was still sinful or a dark evil. And
a dark art, or, you know.
Yes,
yeah.
I know in my own way that I had done that, because you don't realize that you have a desire to deconstruct from some of your religious beliefs, but you don't realize until you're faced with that bias that you're still filtering some of your beliefs through a narrative that is no longer serving your highest good. So I think that's an invitation for all of us to, when we come up against those things, like, well, where is this coming from? Is this something that's really true? Or am I willing to sit and maybe be a little uncomfortable, but listen to people, listen to the wisdom keepers, and to the data, the solid data that tells us, first of all, the Bible was mistranslated. It's been taken out of context. And the science proves, just like you said, that fluidity and gender authenticity is found throughout nature. So that's everywhere. So I think that's, you know, as we look at these classes that'll be coming up, that's something that we very much are trying to do, is focus it on. So that regardless of where you're coming from, you'll have an opportunity to learn from that.
Mhm.
So you want to talk a little bit about some of those classes that are coming up in the fall? Just a little teaser.
Yeah. Okay. I'll give you a little bit. I'll tell you, we have two workshops coming up that I believe that are being done by the same person she's a Lukume priestess. And she's also an interfaith minister. She's actually just completed a book that's being published talking about the return to how she believes that I forget the name of the book, but how society will be saved. We will lose this toxicity will pass once if we can revert back to a more organic and spiritual way of life, earth-based religion, earth-based traditions, matriarchal spiritualities, matriarchal societies. And again, when I say matriarchal societies, people think, oh, it's poo-poo men. That's
Yes.
not what it means. That's not what it means at all. And she'll be doing two, I can't recall the names of the workshops that she'll
And I
be
meant to
doing.
have them right here, and that's okay. And while Reverend Arda is looking those up, I want to invite any of you who might have questions for Reverend Arda, or if you have ideas for workshops or classes, because a lot of what we are designing in these workshops are because we are looking at what you have asked. The questions that you have asked, the directions that you're looking for, these workshops are being based on that. So if you have any questions or you have suggestions, you can email Reverend Arda at revarda, REVARD as in dog, at numasoul.com. So please reach out to her. She would be happy to hear from you.
Yeah, I would love to know what people are interested in. There has to be a starting point. And again, we want to meet people where they are and give them what they need, right? So if I bust out with a class on, interspirituality or, something that really isn't going to make sense for anybody just yet, I want to meet people, and I'm seeing in a lot of the lives and a lot of your TikToks, there are a lot of people that are into Wicca, into earth-based traditions. There are a lot of pagans. So I thought this would be a really wonderful way to start. Two of the workshops that she'll be doing, one is Walking the Wheel. Let me pull this up. Nature Spirituality for Wellness. And the other one is Invoking the Goddess.
Ooh.
So this one's coming in fall. The other one I think is coming in January. It's in the beginning of the new year. It's Invoking the Goddess, bringing the divine feminine into awakened consciousness. We also have, I think in October, shamanism.
Yes.
With a real hereditary Tuvan shaman. Shamanism began in Siberia, Mongolia, Tuva, that area of the world. This person, Chokbar is her name. She is a quite a well-known shaman from Tuva. She lives here now in the United States. I actually first saw her at the Rubin Museum, and this was some years back, and I was mesmerized by her as she ended up becoming my teacher. For shamanism, she ended up, helping me discover my own shamanic roots, and she's magnificent. So she's going to be doing a workshop on shamanism. We're going to begin with shamanism, kind of like shamanism 101. So it's going to be for people who don't know anything about it. And then from that point on, she'll do other types of, workshops as well. Power animals, drumming, rattling, and understanding the significance of these things. I've been to her classes. They're magnificent.
I'm looking forward to all of those. I'm signing up for all of them. You're not going to be able to keep me away from those. And Reverend Arda and I are also looking at a curriculum around healing from religious trauma, looking at Jesus through the mystical lens. We will be looking at the spiritual but not religious path, but also very important, as we said earlier, about moving towards those things that break your heart. It's about becoming an informed and active sacred activist, and how important that is to your spiritual journey. So be looking for all of those workshops coming soon. Any last words before we close this out?
No, I'm just very excited for all that we have coming, in the fall. I'm really excited for God is Gay. I know we're going to have a limited number of people because we want to keep this, we want to keep it conversational as well. We want to be able to get people's input. I'm really looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to Dr. Roman's class. And I really want you all to email me and tell me what you need. Tell me what you want. We're here to support you, to help you, to companion you on this journey, because nothing happens overnight. This is a process.
Yes.
Deconstruction is a process. Stepping into your spirituality is a process. And we are here to help you with that.
Don't forget that you can email Reverend Arda at revarda@numasoul.com. And pre-registration is actually going to be offered to our subscribers. So be sure that you also email us at info@numasoul.com and ask to be added to our newsletter, because that is a way that you can get into these classes ahead of time. We like to love on our subscribers. Reverend Arda, thank you so much. You know how I feel about you and how much I'm so honored that you are on this journey with me. I know that your passion and your knowledge is exactly what we need. As your official title is the Director of Programs and Partnerships, but it's just so much more than that. And I'm just so honored that you have taken this on to help lead Numa Soul Center for Spiritual Transformation.
Oh, it's an honor and an absolute dream to be here. I believe wholeheartedly, that this is, I'm doing the most important work of my life.
Same here. Everything up to this point has brought us to here.
I agree.
Okay, friends, be sure to join us next week here on our podcast, Spirituality Matters, and throughout the week at revkarla.com and numasoul.com, as well as Instagram, Facebook, and of course, TikTok. You can find all of our usernames on those two websites. Okay, beloveds, I'm honored to be in this space with you, and I pray that you did receive something, because I know I did. The teacher teaches what she needs to hear. That was actually one of our first lessons in seminary.
I remember, and it's so true.
It is so true. And now, beloveds, go in peace and be at peace. Go in love and may you be loved. Go and know that others are on this journey with you and you are not alone. You're seen and deeply and unconditionally loved, just the way you are. Bye for now. Blessings on your week. We'll see you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to another uncut episode of Spirituality Matters. To submit questions to Rev Karla, email us at spiritualitymatters@revkarla.com. Follow @Rev Karla on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Pinterest for more spirituality teachings. Check out her blog posts at revkarla.com and sign up for email alerts while you're there so you don't miss a thing. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos. Bye for now.